presentations, and our first presenter for the afternoon is Sophie Neville. Sophie has sent, he cannot be here, cannot be live online. She has sent to us her presentation about her work, and her paper title is "It's a Riot." Sophie is a contemporary textile artist based in Cambridgeshire in the UK. Her artwork combines traditional craft techniques such as hand embroidery and crochet with contemporary socio-political and feminist subjects, often featuring text and appropriated elements. So, I will share the presentation with you.
Hello to everyone at the GroundWork Symposium. Thank you so much to Marina for inviting me to give this talk. Unfortunately, I'm not able to come to you live, but I'm really pleased to be able to give this pre-recorded presentation about my work, It's a Riot. I'll start off by telling you a little bit about my practice. I'm a textile artist and I work with handcraft techniques such as embroidery and crochet. I use these methods to create largely text-based works which address various different feminist and political concepts. I often incorporate appropriated text and images into my work, along with my interest in linguistics and the language of political discourse. I use traditional craft techniques. In 2017, I created an embroidery hoop based on a sign I saw at a women's.
So just
yes, just do it.
So go on to it. It's just this one, and then it should look.
Yes. So, take two.
Hello to everyone at the GroundWork Symposium. Thank you so much to Marina for inviting me to give this talk. Unfortunately, I'm not able to come to you live, but I'm really pleased to be able to give this pre-recorded presentation about my work, It's a Riot. I'll start off by telling you a little bit about my practice. I'm a textile artist and I work with handcraft techniques such as embroidery and crochet. I use these methods to create largely text-based works which address various different feminist and political concepts. I often incorporate appropriated text and images into my work, along with my interest in linguistics and the language of political discourse. I use traditional craft techniques to talk about politics because I enjoy how the slowness and permanence of a method such as hand embroidery is contrasted by the fast-paced ephemerality of modern political discussion. In 2017, I created an embroidery hoop based on a sign I saw at a women's march. It reads, "A woman's place is in the riot." I've made a few different iterations of this work since then, and it's probably the work that people talk to me about the most. Some people have asked why I use the word riot. Why would I want to associate the feminist cause with violence? I was surprised at the strong emotions that this word evoked in people. In 2020, the word riot seemed to be everywhere in the news. Black Lives Matter protests were sweeping the globe, and media sources went back and forth over whether to call them riots. In January 2021, the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. was stormed by a pro-Trump mob. The subject of what constituted a riot seemed to be a widespread talking point, and all these things led me to wonder, what does the word riot really mean? I decided to create a series of artworks exploring this idea. The It's a Riot series consists of 15 different artworks and objects which form a wall-mounted installation, and a video artwork which hopefully you've already seen. As you can see in the video, each artwork is completely different. They each address a different meaning, context or implication of the word riot. When placed together in the installation, they form a visual map of this single word's very complicated definition. The hand-knitted scarf acts as both the title for the installation and references Riot's associations with football. When I spoke to people about what they thought riot meant, many people mentioned the idea of the football hooligan, Research on social media showed that this wasn't purely an outdated stereotype. In fact, one of the most common topics for posts tagged Riot was football, with some fans actively using the word to describe their own behaviour. To read someone the Riot Act is a common phrase in English. I wanted to find out where it came from and researched the original Riot Act, a piece of 1714 legislature which was required to be read aloud to any groups accused of rioting to force them to disperse. The law was often abused by authorities who would class any gathering of peasants as a riot. This work is a black hoodie and balaclava, items often associated with modern-day rioters, and the back of the hoodie is embroidered with the text of the original Riot Act, demonstrating the contrast between stereotypes of rioters throughout the ages. The word riot has found a lot of popularity in subcultures, and this has led to its frequent use in music. I was interested in how this divisive word was being used across many different music genres, including punk, rock and folk, in band names, song titles and lyrics. This punk-style denim jacket is emblazoned with patches which each reference a different musical use of the word riot. The pink balaclava is a nod to the infamous Russian punk band Pussy Riot. The media has a lot of control over how words get used in the public consciousness. This has an impact on not only the language we use, but the way we think about news stories entirely. I felt like this was something I had to include in my project. I googled the word rioters on a random day and took words from the top stories the algorithm suggested to me. These range from more predictable ones like violence or yobs to more unusual or confusing ones like victims or cancel culture. This snapshot of the general confusion around what the word riot should be used for is presented in this fabric collage. Riots are often about identity. As feminists in the 1970s said, the personal is the political. I chose 3 riots from Western history which were strongly linked to the identities of those involved to research. I chose the Peterloo Massacre, which marked a turning point in the fight for voting rights for all classes, Black Friday, when suffragettes clashed with police over women's right to vote, and the Stonewall riots, which sparked the beginning of the modern LGBTQ rights movement. I represented each of these by embroidering an image of the event over a miniature version of a flag associated with its participants. One area where I was surprised to find the word riot being used frequently was in branding. All over social media, #riot leads you to swimwear companies, vape liquids, music festivals, and craft stores, amongst other brands. Such an evocative word seems like an unusual choice to name your t-shirt company, but nevertheless is very popular. I found 11 brands which use the word riot, isolated the word from their logos, and then put them together to create this free-form hand embroidery. As well as in branding, riot crops up in our everyday lives through the idioms and phrases we use. A riot isn't just an uprising, it could be a fun person, an exciting event, something that's gotten out of hand, or even something brightly coloured. I chose 3 common idioms and embroidered them onto vintage postcards, which each have a tongue-in-cheek reference to the words in the phrase. Riot gets used in a lot of political causes, but it has a specific tone when used in feminist activism. It isn't necessarily negative or violent, it's empowering, it's about standing up to the system. I included a framed photograph of my A Woman's Place work to represent this use of the word, but also as a nod to my own relationship with the word riot in my practice. It's in a slightly shabby photo frame because I decided to make it look like a photograph of an old friend. The largest piece in the installation is a wall hanging covered in hand-embroidered text. The words are appropriated from the comments section of an article titled, "As the George Floyd riots continue, let's be clear where the violence is coming from," although interestingly The Guardian changed the word from riots to protesters a few days later. The text I've used gives a snapshot of how riots, and particularly riots about race, get discussed online. Much of it is two warring sides of hate levelled at either the protesters or the police, and blatant racism fuels a lot of the use of the word riot. But amongst this there are also some well-made points, some personal stories, complete indifference, and people trying to make the whole thing a joke. I decided to highlight the central words in bright red to make a point that no matter what the word riot means to us, the truth is anything but clear. The installation as a whole is eclectic and perhaps a bit incongruous. It's a series of objects which at a glance seem unconnected, but on further inspection each demonstrate one side of what the word riot means. And of course this is only from my perspective as a white middle-class British woman living in 2021. Undoubtedly if another person were to conduct this research, it would look very different. The video artwork aims to expand on this sense of organised chaos. It shows shots of the work both installed on a wall and in active contexts, being worn or waved about. I'd not originally planned to make the video, but making work during a pandemic meant I could not rely on a gallery exhibition for the work to be seen. The situation forced me to think differently about how audiences would interact with the work. There's an undercurrent of punk DIY aesthetic throughout the whole installation because of the rebellious nature of the subject combined with the handcrafts and the appropriated objects. So I decided to embrace this and created a lo-fi video work with a punk-inspired guitar soundtrack, which my brother kindly composed for the project. There's an awful lot going on in this artwork, so alongside the installation and video I created an information booklet which has descriptions of each work and notes about my research, which is available on my website. The individual contexts for each work are too much to fit on a wall text, and also not every viewer is going to want that. I think it's important for there to be space for audiences to interpret art in their own way. However, the work does open up a lot more when you know the thinking behind it, so I wanted to create a resource for gallery audiences to access if they wish. So why was it important to make this work? For me, making work about language, particularly the language of political discussion, is important because it can encourage people to consider the words they use. This has an impact on much more than the way we speak. Words are prescriptive. The language we use to describe people or situations shapes the way we think about them. This is especially true in an age when many of us get our news from social media, seeing only brief headlines of a story. If you hear that a riot has broken out in your city, you might think of reckless destruction, selfish hooligans who just want to fight with the police. If you hear that a protest is happening, you might think of people peacefully marching down the street with placards. But these words could be used to describe the same event. And our preconceptions can drive language too, as we see when news outlets rush to call black demonstrators rioters but don't use the same terms to describe white people performing the same actions. Although It's a Riot started by asking a question, what does the word riot really mean, it does not present an answer. The point is not for me to tell people how they should think about the word, but for them to make up their own mind. They might not even change their mind at all, but if they have considered how this one word gets used in different contexts, they might do the same with other words in the future. We live in a world governed by media of various kinds, and we need to think carefully about what sort of media we consume, where our information is coming from. We also need to challenge our own preconceptions. Writing for this symposium has made me think about the way my practice engages with sustainability. I think it does so in two ways. One is the environmental impact of the materials I use. I try to keep this to a minimum. The textile industry plays a big role in pollution, so I use repurposed materials wherever possible. Almost all the materials used in It's a Riot are second-hand. The clothes, the white fabric, frames, boards, postcards. Lots of the fabric and yarn used is offcuts from other projects. The embroidery thread is all 100% cotton. And I was proud of what I managed to create using mostly repurposed materials. Incidentally, this also affected the overall look of the project by creating that DIY aesthetic that I talked about earlier. The other way I think about sustainability in relation to this work is through getting people engaged with political ideas. In order to have a sustainable society, we all need to have an awareness of the world around us, of social issues, of politics, of other people's experiences, and not everyone is going to engage by becoming an activist or going to protests. My aim is to spark conversations, to get people to think and to cause little interruptions in somebody's day. I hope that It's a Riot will make people think about the language they use and question where those ideas come from. Some changes come from big ideas which impact the world, but I think we also need some which come from small disruptions made with tiny, delicate stitches. Thank you very much for listening to the presentation.
Okay, so thank you very much to Sophie for her lovely, to go away. Her lovely the presentation of her work. Here I am again. Yes, very young, up-and-coming artist from the area, very, very young, engaging with things that are big and questioning also the use of some sort of force in order to dismantle the systems that are present systems that are in place at the moment.